So joining us on this episode of the Zen Business Podcast is my great friend and leadership coach and serial entrepreneur, Gio. Gio, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for your grace and hospitality.
Oh, mate, it's lovely to have you here.
A chai latte on almond milk.
No,
and
we got it all. There was even chocolate.
there was even chocolate. I can rate it. So today we're going to talk about leadership. We're going to talk about the difference between influence and control. We're going to talk about fear-based leadership. We're also going to probably touch on the masculine and feminine when it comes to leadership and how that plays out.
Yep.
How there's a duality to both sides of the masculine and the feminine, and which we were just talking about before we started filming. But I thought I'd kick it over to you just to share a little bit of your story to begin with, and how you got to be, where you are today, which is empowering and making a profound difference in the lives of men and women, especially in the small business entrepreneur space, when it comes to, really creating a life that they love. Very much aligned with the purpose of this show, which is, creating a life that you love while building your company.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd just kick off and have you share a bit of your story, because it is inspiring, and the work that you've done around it, is very moving. So I'd love you to share.
Yeah. Look, I think everything that I have come to have in my life and work with in my life, I think has come out of experience, obviously, So we have one life to live, and no matter how many twisty turns in our road that we have, and I'll start to share some of those in a minute, each one of those are purposeful. Whether you know it at the time or not is another thing, but certainly when I look back and I can see the tapestry of my life, it was all perfectly interwoven to lead me to exactly where I'm at. In saying that, I've caused myself great difficulties over the years, as you know, in the mix of when it's happening. And a lot of that sits in and around self-judgment and self-worth and whatnot. But I think for me, the distinctions that I make and the people that I work with is around making a difference, particularly for business owners, but also in relationships, people that are, struggling relationships or have left a relationship. I work with them because, businesses are so integral to the whole of their lives. So it consumes a lot of energy, a lot of time for small and medium businesses. The person that's running that, quite often it's a husband-wife team, they're consumed in those businesses. And so the impacts that has, the reasons why we do what we do in our businesses has become apparent, well, certainly in my own context, but it's easy to then relate that to other people. Mm-hmm. And then the effects that has on relationships, having my own, dilemmas in that over the past years and running my own business, has allowed me to sort of dissect it. I think really the biggest thing from my life purpose is that, and again, I had to go into all of these things and kind of explode everything so that I could work out how to put it all back together. And I've become a bit of a mechanic in that. So that when I see somebody, I have somebody that I'm working with, whether it be the leader of an organisation or somebody in a personal relationship, I can actually see the mechanics of what's going on there and then help them to start to see what's going on, not only from their perspective, but from the other person's perspective that might be involved from there. So if it's a staff member or a spouse. So to do that, what I thought would be great would be to maybe just tell my story. And along the way, we'll see what distinctions come up and then go from there. So.
Yeah, perfect. And it's something that we haven't done on the show before, which I'm excited for you to share. And because I know you've done a lot of work healing past wounds. And if there was one thing, really it's healing the wounds of your inner 5-year-old. And you've done the work and you continue to do that work.
It's non-stop.
Yeah, absolutely. The next layer of the onion, really. So, I'd love you to share your story.
Yeah, so I suppose the earliest recollection is when I'm around 7, just about to turn 8, my life dramatically changed. We were overseas at the time, and I woke up one morning. It was quite early, still quite dark. We were in Germany at my uncle's place, and my mum and dad were having a pretty bad sort of blue, and there were threats of being, going back to Australia, and we were only over there for holidays, but, Mum was crying, there was a whole lot of stuff going on, and there's a whole story in and around that, and I don't want to get into that, but the context of my relationship with my father changed right there and then. It wasn't conscious of it. I can see it now looking back. And what started to occur after that day was I started to get physically abused, and pretty badly. He's a powerful man. He's only short, but he was blacksmith by trade, had forearms on him like Popeye. And so he started to physically, and mentally abuse me. And so what happened at 8, and through the work that you mentioned, that I've uncovered, is I made 3 distinctions about myself. And again, these weren't conscious distinctions, but they were distinctions nonetheless. And they were that I was not lovable, I wasn't valuable, and that I was a coward. And the cowardice is really around the fact that at 8 years of age, I couldn't defend myself. So I'd just cover up. So this goes on for many years, and at about the age of 11, I remember being in my change room for swimming at primary school, and I took my shirt off, and I heard a collective gasp in the room. And that was at the state of my back, because I was black and blue. There were belt marks, hand marks, you name it, all over me. There was this collective gasp. And so I made a new distinction at this point in time, and that was that what was happening to me was wrong. See, because up until then, it was just what was happening. I really wasn't conscious to having any sort of judgment about this. It was just that, until this moment. And so again, the relationship's deteriorating. The mental manipulation was really a big part of it from that age onwards as well. There was trauma in and around my mother and father's relationship all the way along, so the stability of our home was quite difficult. We get to points, and what I recognise about myself in my, I'm trying to think of the right word for my nature, prickly nature would be a good word for it, is that I would then I find myself actually instigating some of the beatings. I'm looking for attention at this point in time from my father, because one of the things that he used to do was just shut down and not talk to me. And that could go on for weeks, even months.
Right.
So I remember vividly coming home with a poor report card at Christmas time, which was often, not because I was a poor student, but I just misbehaved. My marks were always pretty good, but the comments from the teachers weren't always, all that good.
Boisterous.
Yeah, boisterous was one of the things. Destructive in class, I think, was one.
Destructive or disruptive?
Both. Both, Simon, yeah. So, things that we can sit down and be a little bit cheeky about now, but certainly at the time, I recognised behaviour patterns at that time. And so he would, Christmas time, I just wouldn't get spoken to, not even on Christmas Day. He'd grunt at me for Christmas Day. And so I would then go and instigate and do things to instigate at least a flogging, so I could get something from
some sort of attention, yeah.
Anyway, get to about 15 years of age, and he's flogging me, and he's over the top of me, and he's pummeling me. He's got close fists, and he's Dad's from Sardinia, and something to do with donkeys over there, right? And so he's screaming at me, not even a donkey so stupid to do the same thing wrong 3 times. Anyway, he finishes the flogging. I stand up and I look him in the eye and I said, "Well, how good are you going?" And he went, "What?" And I said, "Mate, you've been flogging me for the same shit for years. You don't realise you're not going to change me. You're going to have to kill me first." And at that moment, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. And up until this point, remember, I'm working on the premise that I'm not lovable, not valuable, and I'm a coward. So this moment was a defining moment in the next stages of my life, because with that fear in this fearsome man in his eyes, I went, "Oh shit, that's power." That's that's what power feels like.
Yeah, and you shifted the balance of it.
Yeah, and I did. It was significant.
Yeah.
And in fact, that was the last time he physically beat me.
There you go.
And the mental stuff continued to go on for years, but the physical side of it shifted right there. And so, of course, being a young man and having great role models in this area, I started to drink and fight. And I was a footy player, so any opportunity on the football field. I never started any. I had plenty of good mates that started them.
You finished them,
but we finished plenty. And one in all in was there's a team ethic, and all that
pretty
sort of
standard
stuff. And I'm involved with young football players at the moment. My son's 18, and it's just interesting to see it all over again, Simon. It really is.
Without the biff these days.
Well, still a little bit of it. A little bit of it. They don't throw too many punches these days, but there's a lot of testosterone going on.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway, so I start drinking and fighting, and we're finding great opportunities to do so on the footy field or, amongst ourselves sometimes. And, this pattern starts to come in, and the drinking really isn't around numbing the pain, and the fighting isn't around feelings and power, right? And if I look at that group of friends at that point in time, all of us had difficulties in our lives, split marriages. There was all sorts of stuff that were affecting those kids. Anyway, we get to about 18 years of age, and I have a first love and all the rest of it. We connect for about a year or two. And of course, we break up because it's the first love. She was a wonderful young girl, but, we got engaged because that was a good thing to do at 18, And of course, when she left, that sent me in a bit of a tailspin. So there was more drinking and even more fighting from that position on. And at about 23, I'd recognised in myself that I was on the same path as my father was. And one of the great things that's occurred in my life is because I've judged his path to be a certain thing, and that for most of my life it's been wrong, of course. It's been a wonderful barometer for me to bounce back off, to go back into what I call, my right path. And I want to really be conscious that has shifted for me. So I don't see his path as being wrong anymore.
Yeah, we're going to come back and dig a little bit deeper around that, because I know you've made peace with all of that, and there'll be those that are watching or listening that, will be mortified, horrified by that story. So I would like to dig a little bit deeper around your forgiveness process and the healing process that you...
Well, still ongoing. But
of course.
So just the distinction that at that point in my life...
But at 23, there was no forgiveness.
No shit. No. I mean, at that point, I'd moved out at 18. I was living on my footy coach's floor for 6 or 7 months while I was doing a pre-vocational course, working for him one day a week so that I could pay for rent. And thank God he was there in my life, because, one of us would have killed each other, if I'd have stayed there. And I'd say it would have been me dead, to be fair.
Yeah.
We were at each other at that point, at 23, there certainly wasn't any forgiveness there, but because I could see myself going down that path, and where it really hit out was a couple of my really good friends. One of them was in a pretty self-destructive mode as well, and he'd start the fight. He was a classic for starting the fight. You go into a pub, and within 10 minutes, you get your first round, and we'd be into it.
Yeah, right.
And I remember we were at Harvey Bay the year before, and we were there for New Year's Eve, and it was 8 o'clock in the evening, and there's an all-in brawl with about 17 people in it. It was like the OK Corral sort of thing, a saloon bar thing. And there's people getting beat up left, right and centre. And I just said to him at the time, I said, what the bloody hell are we doing? So him and I end up knuckling. And so the next year, I'm sitting there going, well, I'm not doing that again, And so I didn't go on the annual trip up to Harvey Bay so that we could terrorise that place once more. I stayed at home and I got myself off the grog. And in that time, I got some time to clearly think. So interesting what part alcohol was playing in clouding my judgments and my thought processes and all the rest of it. And at this point, I'm a bricklayer by trade as well, by the way. So I'm surrounded by a lot of people on alcohol, a lot of alcoholics, a lot of criminals that I was working with, seasoned criminals. I got clear, and I just went, this is not what I want for my life. And so that year was a significant year in my life. I cleaned myself up. I enrolled myself in the Diploma of Construction Management, which was 5 years, 3 nights a week, which had to take discipline, which I'd had all the way through my life. I'd been involved in Air Cadets, and I was a sergeant in Air Cadets, and I was a leader there. I was a leader in my scout stuff. I was a captain of volleyball. So I'd had these leadership roles all the way through my life. So there's duality to me. There's this leadership and strength in one area, destructive on the other side.
Yeah.
It's something, the two of me, I call it. Gio, and I don't know what the other bloke's name is, but and so I adopt my and I remember the first night of this diploma, Alan Allsop, the guy who enrolled, because I go into it and I haven't finished my apprenticeship, and at the time the prerequisite is that I had to be a tradesman. And I wasn't a tradesman until I think it was March or April of that year. So he said, oh, look, mate, come back in June and we'll put you into the next intake. And I said, no, mate, I'm here now. You either put me in now, or I don't know if I'll be back in June, And he put me in, he broke the rules for it and put me in. And interesting, you fast forward 5 years, I finished that course. But on that first night, Alan Allsop addresses 45 of us in the room. And he says the stats of this program for the last 35 years is that out of the 45 of you that are sitting in this room, half of you will be gone by the end of this year, 5 of you will complete.
Wow.
And he's bang on. That's exactly what happened. And we started at Mankravat TAFE back in the day. We did 2 years there, and then I went to Ithaca TAFE at Red Hill there and did the last 3 years there. And the lovely little tie is on the last day of my diploma, I'd handed in my assignment, hadn't seen Alan in 3 years, and I'm walking up the hallway after handing my assignment, and there's Alan also walking down the hallway.
Of course there is, yeah.
And I said, Alan, you wouldn't believe it, I finished the course. And he said, I knew you were going to finish the course the day you walked into my office. I said, shit, I wish you'd have told me that. Because there's many a time I thought about dropping out, and I told him that. You know? Yeah. He said, yeah, but you didn't. And I knew that in you when I put you in. So that, again, I didn't see that in me. And
that drive and determination.
Yeah, I've judged myself very harshly along my life because of the circumstances, I believe, is probably what led me to make those decisions about not lovable, not
That's
valuable.
right, yeah. When that's driving the show, you don't get to see the strengths.
No, yeah. And yet he saw it in abundance. He just knew that this guy's going to finish it, right? He was going to be one of the 5.
And isn't that just a great leadership principle in itself? And that is listening to someone greater than they listen to themselves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, we've all had the benefit of having people that have put time into us as people.
Even if we don't recognise it.
And even if we haven't even appreciated it.
Or appreciated, yeah.
And they've seen something in us. And I certainly, when I coach people, sometimes there's a frustration as a coach. You know what you're seeing in front of you and the potential that's sitting there.
I often say that. I say, look, I've got a request, and my request is that you listen to my relationship to you over your relationship to you, because I can see the potential in that.
Yeah.
You know, stop listening to that self-doubt and listen to me. Believe me. Don't believe that the fearful ego mind.
That's interesting, because that decision at around 23, there was a guy called Peter Pegangelli that grabbed me. It was a couple of years earlier, and we were sitting in the smoko room, and he was my project manager for the company I was doing my apprenticeship with. And Peter said, Gio, do you need a lift home this afternoon? He'd never given me a lift in the past or anything. He never gave me a lift after this either, by the way. And I said, yeah, actually, mate, I do. You know. So he said, well, I'll give you a lift home. So we're in the car, and he says, Gio, what do you want to do with your life? And at this stage, I'm about 19 or 20, and I thought, you know, girls and alcohol sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
I was really good at alcohol, no good at girls. He said, well, mate, here's the go. You know, because I said that out loud, of course, because I'm a funny bugger. He said, well, here's the go, mate. When you go onto the smoko shift tomorrow, have a look at the guys that are 10 years in front of you and see if that's, because that's the path you're on, if that's where you want to be. And then have a look at the guys that are 30 years in front of you and have a look and if that's where you want to be. And I looked in that next room. That next day I was sitting in that room and I looked around, and the guys that were 10 years, there were a number of hardened criminals in there. There were guys that had done rape and grievous bodily harm, and they'd been in jail a number of times. There was the guy who used to give me a regular lift, I'll never forget the first day he gave me a lift. He's rummaging around at the bottom of the XC Falcon, you know. It comes up and he pulls out a square beer, a Bundy rum, right? Cracks it, and we're going from Holland Park to Kangaroo Point. It's not a long drive.
Yeah. So what's that? 5Ks, 10Ks?
Probably that. Maybe back in those days, maybe 15, 20 minutes at most.
Right.
By the time we got to work, mate, half that bottle was gone.
Straight. There, right.
Just, you want some? No, mate, I'm all good. I'm good, thanks. Same guy used to hang, a 6-pack of beers in the water drum that the labourer would use to keep them cool so he could drink them and smoke it, right? A full-on alcoholic, you know.
Yeah.
So I remember, and then the guys 30 years would get out of the seat, and it'd take them 15 steps before they could warm up and straighten their back and their knees and all the rest of it, you know. So, and I remember something that I'd forgotten, but I was reminded of this in 2005. Another significant point in my life. But I stood up in that room that day and I went, I won't be laying bricks in 10 years' time. Said it. Proclaimed it.
Proclaimed it. Wow.
There's 60 guys in the smoko shit. And they all went, sit down, you dickhead. We all said that. And I went...
The expected response.
Yeah. Anyway, you fast forward to 2005 and I'm working for Mirvac as a site manager by then. I'd been to London. I'd done all sorts of stuff. I'd finished my diploma. And this old guy that was in the room that day, Ray, is walking down the street. And he'd been working on the refinery building. So we were doing the housing element to that development, and he was doing the commercial. And he had been working on the refinery building for about 6 months. And the two of us had never crossed paths. We were literally within 50 to 60 metres of each other for 6 months. And hadn't. And on this particular day, it was his last day of work. He was retiring. And he comes walking down the street, and I'm walking up the street. He goes, "Hey, Joe, how are you?" And I hadn't seen him since, I finished laying bricks in 97, so I hadn't seen him since then. He says, "Bugger me, you did it."
You did it. He got out.
And I said, "Did what?" And he reminded me of what I'd done in the smoko room.
Yeah, right.
And I went, "Geez, I did that in 7 years, right? I didn't do it in 10, So interesting that when you set your mind to something and forget it, to be fair, I let go of the need to, but I put all the steps in place. I did the diploma, and that's what led me into my future roles. And I think the significance of those moments is that I want to, articulate that whilst I had one side of me that was quite destructive, I had this other side that was driven, passionate, engaged and whatnot. And I was in leadership roles all the way through my 20s. I started running jobs. To be fair, there were small jobs that I was running as an apprentice. So people had recognised in me along the way, whilst I did not see this in myself, that leadership quality. When I was finally given, roles in my early 20s, probably 22, 23 years of age, I would suggest that I was a forceful leader. So this really comes in and around leadership and in relationship, right? It comes down to control versus influence. And so as a 23-year-old, scared like a jackrabbit, basically, I got to control all of this. Otherwise, my boss is going to be up me for the rent, all of those sorts of things. And to be fair, I'm working in an environment there's not a lot of evolution in there. We're not sitting there trying to coach people. My first major job was a high-rise in the city.
Yeah.
I went in there with a guy, Ray, and he says to me, Bill was the guy that pulled me in there, and we'd done some work in the early stages of this job in the basement levels, and he says, "Hey mate, just come up." So I drive into town. It was in Mary Street, I think it was, and we go in there and we're in the basement. So I said, "Mate, what am I here for?" And he gives me a box of plans. He says, "It's yours," and walked out the door. That was my
welcome to A grade.
Welcome to A grade. And I went
on a high-rise building.
On a high-rise building.
Yeah.
I hadn't been introduced to anybody from Multiplex who were building it, other than the guys I already knew from the couple of times that I'd been there. I didn't know who was coming the next day, and it was the next day. So this is like 3:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So guys come in the next day. I don't know where I'm supposed to start. I didn't even know if there were blocks on site. And I went up to the Multiplex guys and I said, "Hey, where do you want us?" And they said, "Well, we need you on level 4," and off we went. Right? And I worked it out, and I worked my butt off, to get it sorted and whatnot. And that's one thing that I'd recognise. But when I got guys in, I controlled the living daylights.
Yeah.
I'd been given a target to hit. We had 5 days to finish a floor. And what we ended up having was 4 guys, 5 days to finish a floor. My target was to smash that target every time. And knowing business now, I know that target would already have inbuilt fat in it, right? So he would have been making good profit on the 5 days. I was smashing it in 3.5. So we did a 25-story tower. Instead of 5 days, I was doing it in 3.5.
Yeah,
so
wow.
he was getting a day and a half out of me every. So I then went very quickly to a guy for my boss then as a fixer. So he'd take me to other jobs and go, "Mate, what can you see? We're having dramas here. They're not making their numbers." I'd walk in 2 weeks later, bang, everybody's getting their numbers. And a lot of that was because I was very organised. One of the benefits, I think, and I was telling you this story today, was that I had a great capacity to think forward. And that was because I used to work with my dad a lot. And if I didn't know what he needed before he did, then that was a flogging that evening, right?
Yeah.
And, I won't go into the story in Italy, but, there was a reckoning on that with he and I when we had a conversation back in 2003 about it. Anyway, so I've got this great planning brain. I'm driven to do that because, to be fair, underneath it is anxiety going the whole time, that if I don't get this right, I'm not valuable, I'm not lovable, I'm a coward, right? Or a failure. I probably would have translated that at those in my 20s as a failure, and then go from there. Anyway, 2003, clean myself up, start the course. Hadn't been dating for quite some time because, to be fair, in my relationship side of things, I pretty much hated women at that point in my life. And not because I hated women, because I hated myself.
Of course.
I had no confidence in myself whatsoever. I hadn't really held down a relationship since my first love, which was finished at 19. And any women that I did attract really only served to rip apart what was already pretty much torn, right? So I remember in May of that year, I decided to go and date, and I remember the first date, I was a big spender. I took her out to McDonald's. I wasn't really interested. It was just, we'd met. I took her out for dinner.
I hope you got a meal or some description.
Oh, she got a deal. She got the
perfect.
Coke and the fries. And back then we didn't have meal deals.
Look out.
And we went to a movie or something
Big
like
spender.
that. Oh,
Did you get some popcorn or what?
I think she paid for the popcorn.
No. Perfect.
And then literally 2 weeks later, and I knew that relationship wasn't going to go anywhere, but 2 weeks later I met my wife of 24 years. And so interesting that when you get yourself onto a path and you start to get centered to who you want to be, that stuff just starts to turn up for you. And that's literally what happened. And that 24 years is probably the most stable, whilst I had my own personal battles in that 24 years, most stable part of my life, to be fair. And we raised 2 beautiful, gorgeous children in that time. We travelled.
Yeah.
We ran a business together, and then my stuff crept back in towards the end. And so, out of all of this, and certainly what I see as part of that, the demise of my relationship and also in my business, was that I was incredibly influential on one hand, but driven to control everything on the other. I was literally a control freak.
Yeah.
Which is exhausting.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what was your experience of life like, being so controlling?
Well, the one thing I'm not short of is energy. Until I was.
You're right.
And I had my reckoning with that about 3 or 4 years ago, when the one thing I've never had to look for is energy. And you only got to go on the drink with me, Simon, to know that. But energy is the thing, right? And then I lost it. And so I had energy to burn. So for me, the duality of this is that the thing that it was costing me was this energy, but I had heaps of it anyway, so who cares, right?
That's
Just
right,
keep burning it.
Yeah.
And
invincible, right?
Well, mate.
Invincible.
Yeah. And I remember when I first started my business, within about 2 or 3 months of starting that business, I recognised that my heart, physically, I could feel my heart all day. Yeah. And it was the adrenaline running through my heart all day. Well, that went for 13 years.
Yeah, wow.
Early days, I went, how good's this, right?
Yeah.
Tough, right? When the going gets tough, the tough get going. And I just kept stumping up and more and more and more. And I work. Mate, I get up. I remember telling a client this. I sent him an email, and it was at 4 o'clock in the morning. And they were friends as well. And he says to me, I get this image of you just getting up and walking to your, but you don't do that, do you? You don't walk straight to your desk and just start working. And I went, yeah, I do. And then finish at 10 o'clock at night and do it all again. And do 80 hours a week for 13 years.
Yeah. That hyper masculine, driven, focused.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly, revered as well.
Of course.
A lot of admirers for the manner and who I was. Those who are a bit more evolved could see the fragility of me as well. Yeah. But certainly for the roles that I played in my business and for other people running their businesses, that energy and that drive and that capacity to be fair on myself looking back at it now, influence and control people. And what I wasn't, probably what I didn't recognise is that I went into both. I could control when I needed to control, and sometimes over-controlled, more times than not. But I also had the great capacity to connect with people, and through that connection, influence, right? So one of the things I've always maintained when I've been working for my own business or anybody else's is to try and have some sort of social element to it, right? Because I love,
You're a social creature.
Social creature.
Yeah.
Love feeding people, love drinking with people and doing all the rest of it. Don't drink as much anymore, but, And so we had that whole process. what's interesting is that, whilst I had this beautiful and successful stability in my life, along that process, my children came along. We were talking earlier today about how they've been my greatest educators.
Yes.
And, there's moments of, again, that fragility turns up, not lovable, not valuable, and probably a failure. Cowardice has probably been replaced by failure because, the whole need to control was driven by that cowardice. So then that turned into, I don't want to fail. And particularly as the breadwinner, the man of the house, I didn't want to fail my family and I didn't want to fail my community. So I was a pillar of my community. I had, I took people to, took fathers and sons to Kokoda for rites of passage programs. I coached rugby for 10 or 11 years, still involved in that club now with our young men, and we do leadership programs with them. But I was at the centre of everything. And then my marriage broke down. And it was, in fact, the first trek to Kokoda that I realised that we were in some pretty deep trouble. Well, I was definitely in some trouble with the marriage. And we started, we did quite a prolonged period of, therapy with it, in marriage counselling and stuff like that. But what it served to recognise was how far the gap was between the two of us at that point. And one thing I'd acknowledge is, God bless that woman, being married to me for 24 years can't have been easy.
No.
Somebody asked me when we broke up, because we were that couple that people would look at and just go, gee,
Yeah, I knew you guys then. Yeah.
And I said, well, here you go. We go up to Lake Muggera, right? You got two boats. You got this V8 Mer Cruiser that's sitting there like a ski boat, He's sitting there. You got this beautiful, 16-foot skiff. And if you get in either one of them, you're going to have a good day. The skiff will just sail off down. It'll be beautiful and graceful and just lovely, right? You get in the Mer Cruiser, you're going to have you get skiing, you get on the biscuit, whatever you want to do. But if you tether one to the other, then the V8 can't go as fast and do what it wants to do, and the skiff is in the chop the whole way. And that's how I would, for particularly towards the end, would sum up the difficulty in the relationship.
Yeah.
And there's no fault on either person's part. Each person is beautiful in themselves, except for the fact that this person didn't see that.
Not then.
Certainly not then.
No.
I do now, but yeah. And then when Ange was having difficulties in our relationship, and I was having difficulties because she was having difficulties, the one thing that I had always been able to rely upon was gone for me.
Yeah. And
so those three pillars just turned up, bang, and smashed me a big time. And it's interesting the timing of it, because it was mid-40s, and through the explosion of all of this, a lot of the learning that's come is that men go through 7 stages of life, and I was in stage 6, and they call that the tunnel. And so it happens from between 42 and 56, and it's usually the death of a father. What had happened 6 months earlier is my father had basically said, "You're dead to me." So he's still alive, but the relationship had died. And as sure as eggs, boom, I was done. And in the tunnel, what happens is you start to ask some very simple but relevant questions to yourself. Who the hell am I? And what is all of this about? And is this as good as it gets? With my 3 versions of that question. Everybody's different, but they're pretty close to what it is. And of course, what I did was I reverted back to control rather than influence. And this goes into that masculine, feminine side of things.
Yeah.
So the masculine in me that is always the thing that I could rely upon came out. And my old footy coach used to say, the best form of defence, mate, is attack. And so out I come. And not attacking anybody in such, but just
the situation.
I've got a shield of armour on.
Yeah, you've defaulted to your masculine. Yeah. It served you well up to this point.
And everything, I was suited for war at this point, even in my marriage at that point. And I wasn't conscious of it then, but that's what was going on. Because I felt I had to defend myself.
The ego was under attack.
Oh, everything was under attack. The pain in that 2 years, and the one thing through my upbringing and the beauty of my upbringing, and one of the things that I've made peace with, is that if I had not have had my upbringing and the physical beatings and the mental abuse, I don't think I'd have withstood the 2 years of pain, because I've got a great capacity to endure pain. And so, of course, that relationship, I made a decision. And I remember sitting on the couch with Ange, who I deeply love and still respect, like you wouldn't believe. But I said to her, the tragedy of this is that in some stage down the future, I'm going to work out exactly what went wrong here, and it'll be too late to fix it. And that's exactly what happened. So we sat down some year or so later, and I had a conversation with her, and I could trace it back to 8 years beforehand. There was a moment. So that comes into this whole thing. How do you transcend out of that? How do you recognise when you're in that control moment versus influence? And that comes down to feelings, really. So we did
your emotions,
a session on this yesterday with a group, and all building trades going, what the hell is this feelings bullshit? And here I am, and here's what I recognise. I've spent 30 odd years. In fact, I've spent 40 years in the trade. So I worked with my old man since I was about 8 years of age. So 40, 41 years. And I have seen good men and women in our trades and salt of the earth people. And I know them because I am them. And the gift I feel that I've been bestowed through all of this life is the capacity to understand that feminine energy of mine being, and let's describe what that is. The capacity to come in and be vulnerable like I am right now and share this story.
Yeah.
That's coming from the feminine, because the masculine in me is telling me to shut the bloody hell up.
That's right.
Because this is going to air, right?
That was well put, actually.
The feminine in me says, mate, there's a story in this. And I know I have benefit from the story, and so if one person benefits from that.
That's right. And I would assert that there's a healing element to it as well, sharing it and being able to have that.
Well, the fact that I'm in a place, Simon, where I can speak it out loud.
That's right.
Yeah, is
and I'd like maybe to circle back to that. What was it that started you on this journey? Because we've heard the journey of the masculine and the warrior and the driven achiever to who you are today, and they're not the same human being. I mean, they're the same form, not the same human being.
No, vastly different person.
So what was the catalyst that had you shift and take this step? Because I knew you. I've known you for how long ago? How long have we known each other now?
12 years.
12 years. Yeah. And I met, my first interaction was the driven builder, larger than life, driven, focused business owner who was going to conquer the world with his company and take no prisoners. Yeah. To be a part of that journey and to see where you are today, that beautiful transformation. And there was nothing wrong, as we talked about, morality and duality here. There's nothing inherently wrong with who you were back in those days. There was nothing to fix or nothing broken. But this kind of journey of self-discovery and journey within. What was the catalyst for that?
That's a good question, because what I recognise about myself the whole way along this process is I've always sought further education, whether it be diploma or to be fair, I pissed my high school years up against the wall. I was an incredibly intelligent person, but I just didn't.
That means wasted for our friends in the States.
Sorry about that translation. I was an intelligent young man who had the capacity to do a lot more academically than what I did, but I just had I didn't see a purpose in it, and that self-destructive nature in me just didn't do it. But as soon as I got out and I realised that my life was, I hated bricklaying more than I hated going to that diploma, and that's what kept me in that diploma for 5 years. So that search to shift my life from bricklaying, and I had some wonderful examples of this. My grandmother used to, who lived until she was 97. She only passed away about 10 years ago. So she was a bedrock of my life. She looked after me when I was young, pretty much every day for about the first 4 or 5 years of my life. And she was an incredibly strong woman. And she would say that anything you want to achieve, mate, you just set your mind to it and you'll get it. Right? And she'd tell these examples of her life. Yeah. And fantastic,
My mum would say the same thing. There's no such word as can't. No such word as can't.
No, you'd turn up at my grandmother's place with the word can't, and she'd give you something for that. And so I had that beautiful thing. My mum is still to this day always educating herself. And that was because she was told at 14 years of age that she was a girl and she couldn't go and finish school.
Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, a big part of my stubbornness comes from that. So I'm Dutch Italian, right? Dutch Sardinian. Wow, no wonder. You know, the Dutch are expressive people and very, you know, they're opinionated. They know what they want.
Strong-willed.
Strong-willed. And the Sardinians are hard-headed, stubborn people, beautiful, intrinsically linked to their emotional state.
Yeah.
So I've got these two expressive cultures in me, you know. And when that played out in the marriage, holy mackerel, there was some bloody fireworks there, you know.
Yeah.
But both of those things fed me to always look for something more. And remember, the premise of me is that I'm not lovable, not valuable, and I'm a coward, but as a consequence of that, I'd better go and fix myself.
That's right. In order to be lovable and valuable and not be a coward. And what I'm hearing in this is that the shift took place when you stopped looking externally to improve yourself and you started to look internally.
Yeah, that's good. Exactly. Because I spent 25 years doing self-development and, you know, personal development and NLP training and all sorts of stuff. And I'm looking for an answer in the teachings. And don't get me wrong, every one of those steps has led me to this point.
Of course,
right now.
Of course, yeah. All purposeful.
But when, you know, I remember a good mate of mine, a mentor, Jonesy, once said to me, he said, Gio, you get this better than anyone I've ever met, but you just don't get it. And I went, what the bloody hell do you mean? And I so know what it means.
So close, but so far away.
I got it here intellectually,
yeah,
you know, but I couldn't bring it into here. And that was the vulnerability piece. You know, I couldn't, and what's tied, and Brené Brown does some beautiful work on this, but what's tied to that inability to share my vulnerability is my shame about who I was. And once I, and our mentor Lorna has a defining moment in this. I mean, because this culminates after my marriage capitulates. I'm in therapy for this. I'm in the middle, or I'm not in the middle. I'm at the end of an 8-day panic attack, but I don't know that at this point. I go to my therapist this one day, and she says, "Here, Joe, you're in some strife here." And she was with us through the marriage separation, and then afterwards, I'm going to give you these drugs. And I said, I'm not taking any drugs. And I'm not against drugs or anything like that. But for me, I just knew that pain was there to serve me. And I said to her, if I'm cutting a piece of timber with a saw, and that saw slips and I start cutting my finger, the pain in my finger is what tells me to stop sawing.
Yeah.
This pain is here to serve me. It is excruciating.
Yeah. And purposeful.
But it's purposeful.
Yeah.
And I'm not numbing that for anything. But want to be conscious that, you know, doctor's advice on all of that stuff as well. Anyway, I remember driving home with the script on my seat in the car. Oh, she said, "But Gio, you're fucked."
That's what she said.
She said that.
I was going to ask you to just share exactly what she said.
Yeah. And I driving home and I went, "Oh, I must really be fucked if she told me I'm fucked," you know. And I'm driving home in the morning and fortuitously and certainly not coincidentally, because I don't believe in coincidence, I had Lorna that afternoon. And it was one of our first couple of sessions together. And something had come up about my dad, about the 8-year-old, you know. And she says to me, "Gio, listen, mate, if you want to transcend through this, you've got to take responsibility for what happened at 8. Oh, you're kidding me, aren't you? How am I responsible for what he did to me?" And of course, what I was actually asking is, how am I to blame? Because that's how most people hear responsibility.
That's the distinction, right? It's not blame.
And she said, "Mate, if you don't take responsibility for the decisions you've made subsequent to it, for the actions you've taken, and for creating the moment," because remember, mate, we work on this premise that we create the whole of our life. Everything that turns up in our life, we've created it for the purpose of knowing who we are.
Regardless of what age you're at.
Regardless of what age. It starts at birth. We pick. I remember she said, "Your soul picked your father and mother." And I said, "Well, I need to have a good hard chat to that soul." Because, oh man, that's a mistake. And of course, that's rubbish. But I took responsibility in that session.
Yeah, because, I mean, let's just break down responsibility for a second. You know, the ability to respond.
Response able. Yeah.
So response able. So it's not let's be really clear, it's not blame. It's not my fault for the beatings. It's not victim shaming or victim blaming or anything along those lines. It's saying, right, cool, well, inside of the paradigm that I create the whole of my own reality.
Yeah. And that's the beauty. And that's how I healed the moment with my dad. And not in that moment, but certainly
that
subsequent to
opened
that.
the door, yeah.
Because what happened was I went, okay, so there's a grander purpose for what's happened in my life.
Yeah.
All of it is purposeful.
Yes.
It's taught me, and what I'll tell you right now, Simon, is that, we've already gone through a couple of the benefits that I can think forward and plan.
You mentioned it before, right? Like had it not been for that upbringing, that hurt and that pain that you experienced in the divorce period, you wouldn't have been conditioned for that.
No.
And goodness knows where that would have ended up.
Oh, and mate, there's a specific day I'll remember vividly where I had the thought. I was sitting in my car.
Very dark place.
And luckily, I've always had a sense of humour because I rang a helpline. I had to go through the privacy policy first, and I just went, "You're fucking kidding me, aren't you?"
Yeah, right.
That's what broke it. I just went, "Holy mackerel, we've gotten so litigious in this country that I've rung a helpline. I've got to go through the disclaimer first before I actually get to somebody."
Yeah.
And that was enough to hang the phone up, and I rang a mate.
Right.
The beauty of the moments is that for the work that I do right now, it's rare. But not uncommon, but it is rare that I find anybody. What's very interesting, Simon, here's the benefit to this, is that people come to me for business coaching, leadership coaching, relationship coaching. And what turns up is a whole other story. So I've had people that I've been the first person that have disclosed that they were sexually abused as a child. I've been the first person, being with me raises this stuff to the surface.
Yeah.
And there's a safe space because I know where they are. And they don't feel like they have to hide it. And it's not conscious. What I'm really present to is that when people sit with me, I had a guy, he took me out for a coffee, he wanted to get to know what my business was like. And he says, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a leadership coach." He said, "What was that?" I said, "I make people cry." I said, "I don't make them cry. They just choose to when they're with me."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Really?" I said, "Well, mate, what
And
happens?"
people pay you for that?
They pay you for that, yeah. I said, "What happens is they feel safe enough to disclose and be who they want to be."
And be open and vulnerable enough to heal the wounds of the past because you've done the work.
Yeah. 15 minutes later, that bloke was crying.
Yeah, right.
The purpose for all of the things that have happened in my life gives me this great capacity to see. But not just see what's going on for others and really get some deep distinctions for them. The capacity to communicate through that because I can go to that level with them.
And what I'm hearing in that is that, it's beautiful, Gio. There's the authenticity and the vulnerability that you display, and it's in who you're being. It's nothing that you're doing necessarily. You're not sitting there intentionally doing authenticity. It's who you're being, and it's in that being. And then there's also the absence of judgment too, which creates that safe space.
That you asked about the transition point. As soon as I drop judgment of myself, and that is still an ongoing thing because it pops up.
Well, that's the human
gig.
Right?
And one of the things I'm starting more consciously becoming aware of is that I am human, and unless I want to change that,
that's right. And that is the human gig.
Of course.
To judge and assess, and we start with judging ourselves, and the more we judge others is really the foundation of, as a result of our judgment, our not good enough.
But it's not even on that level. Without judging that this is daytime, how will we know what night
Correct.
is? Right?
We live in a relative world. That's right.
Yeah, it's all about contrast, right? Everything that we live in the human world is about contrast. So I need judgment to get that contrast.
That's right. To survive.
Yeah, that's how we distinguish them.
Yeah.
Right? So it's so fundamentally interwoven into our thing. Where we get in trouble with it is when we displace the judgment of ourselves onto others. This is where we get into control.
Well, that's the righteousness piece, right? Where we experience the judgment not as a judgment, but as the truth.
Yeah, but even more than that, when I go to judge you as a person, that's because I don't want to take responsibility for judging myself on the same thing.
Totally. That's the next cut of it.
So that's about displacement of my shit onto you, right? And that's the beautiful thing. So Lorna says, well, every human being that comes in is just a version of you on steroids with a megaphone, right? And God bless them, because they're angels in our
Yeah.
life. They are there. If I use this paradigm to the way that it is designed for, and so intrinsically, beautifully designed for, whoever turns up in my life, good, bad, indifferent, whatever I want to judge that, they are there to show me to me. And in karmic terms, maybe some of those things are about me clearing some of the karma that I've created in my life. You know.
So how does this play out from a leadership perspective? We go back to forceful leadership versus influence. And, you could say from the realm of duality, you could say leadership based in fear versus leadership based in love.
In love, yeah. Well, you and I have been coaching for a long time now, and you longer than me, but most business owners will turn up and go, I've got a problem with my leadership team.
Yes.
Can you go and work with them?
Yeah.
Boom.
Can you go and fix that?
Stephen Covey used
Fix
to
them
say,
over there.
Yeah, Stevie Covey used to say, as soon as you think the problem is out there, that becomes the problem.
That's
Beautiful work that he used to do, and I
Yeah.
spent a lot of time doing his programs, right?
Yeah.
And my own version of that, Brian Wood, Gio, I was bagging on. I was the same. I was leading men, concreters at the time, and I'm sitting there ragging on who these people are, and they're this and they're that, and all the rest. And he walks me in front of a mirror, in front of a group, mind you. He said, Gio, just have a look in that mirror. And I said, yes. So I'm looking at the mirror in front of everybody. I'm about 28, 29 years of age. He said, the only problem you've got, mate, is staring you right back in the mirror. I promptly thanked him for his thing with a swift fuck off. But one of the greatest things that was ever pointed out to me. Now, I didn't get it at the moment.
No, you wouldn't have.
No, but
No.
I got it very shortly afterwards.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful to Brian for having the courage and recognising in me that I need the back end of an axe to the head sometimes to just get the point across, very blunt. So from a leadership point of view, most management structures are in around. So let's just think about how we set up KPIs. It's all on production. Sorry.
Output.
A lot of standardised, particularly from the 80s and 90s, stuff that we carry into businesses isn't around output, right? Intuitive leaders understand that it's more than that. It's about engagement. It's about how did we might not, if I've got a debt recovery person and that person's in that role, but she or he is engaging. I say she because it's usually women that do that role because of their femininity they can bring to it, because it's usually difficult circumstances. How does she get the money out of somebody? She can browbeat them and bash them with a stick, control, or she can engage with them and show them a larger purpose to what they're doing. To do that, it takes time, it takes communication, it takes engagement. You're not going to get through 20 of them a day.
No.
Right? But you might have a far higher success rate if you did. And so when I look at managers versus leaders in an organisation, managers manage. It's all about production, output and all the rest of it. And we have to be careful because it is business and we need to get that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
But I would suggest to you that the fastest route to getting that is by engagement. And so that's what leaders do. Leaders set a vision. This is where we're going. This is how we're doing it. I want you on board. Who wants to come? Then it's all good to set the vision, but who are you as a human being? I want to know who you are, who your family is, what's important to you. I want to be able to, as the leader, understand when you're off kilter, because I want to recognise that your behaviour is not aligned to who you normally are, and then ask that question, not judge you because your KPIs aren't getting met. And go, is there anything going on in the background for you? And that simple question often goes, well, I've just separated, or I've got a sick child, or. Because there's always a reason for somebody behaving outside of the normals of their standard behaviour patterns.
Yeah. And what I really get with you, Gio, when you ask that question, you're genuinely interested in the response.
Oh, yeah.
One thing I think people take a left turn around this is that they're asking in order to produce greater outputs.
Oh, yeah. And if you do that, you'll be seen through like that.
100%. But I want to make that clear, because it's something that, you and I might take for granted. But, there may be people watching, listening that have, they haven't done the work internally, or they're just starting out on the journey. The context in which they ask those questions may come from still a fear-based paradigm.
And also a fear of not knowing what to say next if something comes out, right? So I think, we've got this great campaign, Are You OK? But it's the next question that's the most relevant.
How do you respond to what comes back?
Because most Australian males will go, yeah, mate, I'm good.
Yeah.
And you know that they're not because their behaviour's showing you differently. Are you sure? because, mate, this is what I'm seeing. And that becomes the most powerful part of that conversation is because, mate, what I'm seeing from your behaviour is this. Now, it's then up to them as to whether they want to engage in that or not, whether they feel safe to engage in that, and that's totally up to them. But you as a human being, the beautiful thing is Harvard's done some great research in this. We feel other people. Right? And they have now worked out that a human being has got a radius of energy of about 3 to 5 metres.
Yeah, it's
I don't
beautiful.
know how they measure that, but it's just wonderful, right? So if I am genuinely engaged in understanding what's going on from you from a place of non-judgment, this is the key to it. If I'm not, God, look, mate, straighten yourself up. If I come in with straighten yourself up, I'm not getting anything. Are you okay? If I come in with, I know I'm concerned, whatever, and in my heart, I don't even need to say that, then that's when this stuff starts to turn up. For me to do that, there's only one place for the work to start, and it's not on the other people, it's on me. And so, one of the other beautiful principles of Lorna's work and what I've adopted, when I say rigorously, that's not a strong enough word. The energy that I have now, this massive energy that I have is only formed now on one thing. And that's getting a greater understanding of who I am. And what drives me and healing the stuff that continues to bubble to the surface.
Yeah, really doing the work, really going within, really healing those past, those wounds.
And having the courage to sit in it. One of the things about pain is a lot of people will defer their emotional
Good
stuff
distinction,
because of the pain. So what we'll do is we won't, and this is where I want to acknowledge me and where I've healed in that not courageous, being a coward, is that in fact, when I look back at my life, I have always, for the most part, dove into the pain. The most courageous thing I could have done at the end of my marriage was call it.
Yeah.
Because I was going to it. I mean, for me, the only other option for me was to end it. Yeah. Not the marriage, me.
No, you, yeah.
So, and I gave that a good think, and I did the thing that I did not want to do. Because there's one thing I do know is that in the last 3.5 years since that marriage breakdown, and that work started well before that. I mean, I was probably in that space for another 3 to 4 years before it. There's no way she could have come on that journey with me. There's just no way. I mean, I know some of the lows that I've had, particularly in that panic attack and all the rest of it. 8 days not getting off the couch. I couldn't even walk out the house. My painter saw me on the first day of it. And he just went, mate, are you okay? I said, no, I don't bloody think I am. So I know that she couldn't have been part of that. And I'm just so grateful to myself to I wasn't thinking this, but I knew it at some level that I had to separate from that. And that's what it takes, is just a smidgen of courage to go and do the thing that you least want to do.
To lean into that emotion.
And I have this wonderful saying with new clients in particular, because what we tend to do is, Pandora's box is our emotional box, and what we, particularly in Western society, and anybody from a Anglo-Saxon background, is that we go and stuff all of our emotions in that box, and then we put a bit of formwork on it and pour a big fucking concrete lid over it. And then when it starts to bubble up, we try and push that past it down.
That's right.
We don't want that coming out, because that's weak. Right? Yeah. Don't you show your... I was talking to an Eastern European guy yesterday about this, and he just went, Gio, we don't talk about feelings because that's weak. And I said, how weak is it? How weak do you think I am? And he went, no, this is kind of inspiring. And I said, there you go. It's not weak, my friend. And the fact that I've spent nearly 40 odd years of my life in construction, there's a purpose to that, right? Because I never wanted to go into construction.
Yeah.
And yet here I am doing this work with people who, to be fair, if you want to look at the greater statistics on this, got a double the rate in this country of the suicide rate amongst men than normal. And it's already high, normal. So
if there's people out there that are listening to this or have watched it that are inspired by your story and want to do some work with you, what's the best way of getting in contact with you and connecting?
Look, I've got my website, which is www.auroresolutions, AURORE.
And I'll put the link below in whatever you're listening to or watching this on.
.com.au. the big thing is to reach out, whether it's from a personal nature or here's the deal. If you're coming to me for business leadership stuff, it's going to get personal.
You're going to go within real fast.
Because there's two things that I will not do. It will not be work with your leadership team first.
Yeah.
It's a top-down, inside-out approach. So the top person I must work with in the organisation because they set everything. Whether they know it or not, they are, particularly in small to medium business. They're the ones that hire everybody. They're the ones that set the culture. They're the ones that set the vision. And yes, you might have managers that are there, but really you're the top dog and that's the way it goes. So whatever you've created in your business is a reflection of who you are. And so I work with you first, and then we might do work with the leadership teams. And top down and then inside out.
Awesome, Gio. Mate, thank you so much for your time. I know you've got to jump on a call to prepare for that seminar that's coming up. Is that going to be live streamed by any chance, or will that just be in person?
We're actually now, because of COVID, it's created a wonderful opportunity. We're actually going to do a hybrid event. So we're going to do live and webinar.
If you want to jump on and participate, feel free to do so. But mate, thank you so much for your time.
Mate, pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.